Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Live, and today, Prime Lunchtime with City Manager. Hey, Brian. How are you?
Rico, good. How are you?
Good, good, much better. I finally got COVID. I'm on the other side of it, so everything's all good on that. Before we get, yeah, it's, things happen. Before we get into the show, let me just introduce our sponsor, EV Remodeling Inc. They've been a corporate sponsor of ours for over a year now, both for the publication and these family of podcasts that I do. So I want to thank them. They based in Peachtree Corners. Eli is a Peachtree Corners resident. Great guy, does great work. Uh, you can visit them at evremodelinginc.com and find out a little bit more about how he does design, build, and can renovate your entire home. So check him out. And I want to thank him for being a corporate sponsor. So we have a lot to discuss. I mean, within the scheme of things, we haven't done this. We skipped a month. It was kind of quiet and stuff, but there's always new stuff. And certainly, this podcast we're going to be discussing the city's look at activating a city marshal system, as well as discussing honorary road names and looking at the RDA and DDA. That's the Downtown Development Authority and the Redevelopment Authority and what they're going to be doing. But the let's lead off with the City Marshal, the activation of that. I know this is in response to the concerns that citizens have had, maybe not directly with the carjacking that happened at the QT and the death of a young man there, and of a young student at Norcross High School. Granted, that was he had left Norcross High School, and that was, I believe, off campus that happened. But two violent crimes that occurred, and of course, listen, the city of Atlanta, all over the city. You can get notifications from 11 Alive at least 5, 6 times a day of things happening. We're thankful that City of Peachtree Corners is not facing that type of crime wave or activity, but I find that this is somewhat of an innovative way of doing this. Instead of a full-on police force, doing something that could be a little different and still have the authority of the police. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about how this came about and how you'd be looking at this and what you were tasked to do.
So, you're right. You hit on some of the origins of getting to this point. We have had some unfortunate incidents of late, with deaths. There's been some other crime, and it's not uncommon as we densify, as Metro Atlanta grows.
Yeah.
Peachtree Corners is growing, and the more people you have in an area, there's just more opportunities for bad actors. So this this unfortunate rise in these kind of things, and property crime is still our main criminal activity type here, but we are just becoming more and more of a target for bad actors. We've had
Mm.
intersection takeovers, not too long ago, where you've got these car clubs that are seizing control of an intersection and doing all sorts of dangerous things with automobiles. You've had instances like that. Even the failed carjacking that resulted in that death was
Hmm.
a group of teens who specifically were targeting communities that had more affluence and
Hmm.
better automobiles, that they could do that slider crime where somebody's pumping gas, or in this case filling air in their tires, not near the driver's side, and they slide in to the seat, because oftentimes the
Right.
cars are left running, or at a minimum the keys are left in the ignition. So as a
Yeah.
community, these instances and incidents rightly get the community, like, hey, what's going on? It seems like there's more of it in a compressed period of time. And so we've started to notice this ourselves, and you've started to see within the last year or so more uh, services and capital assets the city has brought into, or brought to bear, to help fight or prevent crime. Probably the best example of that would be of late, the LPR camera system that we put throughout the city, which, our partnership with Fusus, a local Peachtree Corners Tech Park, Atlanta-based business that's created a software platform that allows cameras of any type and owned by private, entities that if they are, give permission, can be tied together to create a video surveillance, net, if you will, for use by, the police. But those efforts were ways for us to start saying, hey, are we doing as much as we can? And we deployed technology and will continue to. That technology does work. We would prefer it to prevent crime. That's the best crime, is the one prevented. But even in the case of these two murders, our LPR cameras, the Fusus network tying those and other privately owned cameras that voluntarily became part of the network, they ended up being the method in which the police were able to identify the gunman and find the gunman. So they work. Unfortunately, they were used after a crime was committed. We'd like to do things to prevent it, but that's examples of what we've done so far. But then of recent times, council tasked me with presenting back to them, in my opinion, based on all the experts I brought to bear, are we doing absolutely everything we can to make sure Peachtree Corners is a safe community to prevent, or call it deflect, crime away from our community? Are we doing everything? And there were, or is, since this hasn't gone live yet, there is some areas in which we are, there's a gap. And some of those areas get into, everything from as good of a job as Gwinnett County Police Department's West Precinct is doing. And, they're going to remain our official police department, no doubt. But they're handcuffed with everything from staffing shortages to even policy constraints that a countywide police department has, that if we had something that was solely focused on the city, doesn't have. And so there are sometimes gaps in the ability to direct resources based on Peachtree Corner specific needs, the enforcement of local ordinances and not countywide ordinances. And so I had to honestly, based on the assessment that my team, came up with, honestly say that we weren't doing quite everything. And there was this gap that we needed to fill. And so there's two ways to fill it. One is to stand up our own police department, which we do not want to do. Right. And when Gwinnett PD does have the resources, they are providing a great service for us. But the other way to fill this gap, and this gap is a gap kind of between code enforcement officers, which are specifically oriented to enforcing local code and local code only, and law enforcement that's enforcing state law. There is a gap. And the gap can be filled if we stood up what we're calling City Marshal Office, very similar to what Sugar Hill has, Beaufort has, both Gwinnett municipalities that have an arrangement with Gwinnett PD, but they identified a gap between their code enforcement and law enforcement that they wanted to fill. So very similar to that, and that is to stand up this program, and the positions would be filled by post-certified officers, standing for police officer standard and training, which is to the to the average viewer here is police academy. Having gone
Right.
through police academy and all the training and to maintain all the certifications that you need to have certain authorities that a code enforcement officer who's not post certified will not be able to have. And so the intent here is to have some people who are able to fill this gap by the authority vested in their position and be able to be controlled by the city so that they can be directed in areas that might be really important to Peachtree Corners, but it's not. Gwinnett PD does not have the resources to specifically address. A good example of late would be, you mentioned the shooting of the Norcross High School student. That was partly driven by Norcross High School students leaving school during school hours, truancy, if you will. And there is a truancy problem of students cutting class and cutting through the woods into the back of businesses that border Norcross High School.
Right.
Those businesses are being adversely affected. The shooting was an unfortunate result of it, but the truancy continues, and students that are trespassing and and then doing things like destroying property, dealing drugs, doing drugs.
Right. And we were talking a little bit about that before too, about how school security are really not able to stop a kid from leaving the school, short of tackling them, if you will.
Well, they can't even
And
do that. I mean, Rico, you're right.
I know I'm being facetious.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. They
Um,
can't touch a kid. I understand. So some of these kids are not respectful of rules, maybe, and they'll leave the school anyway.
that's right. And when
Um,
they don't have a support network at home,
right.
the school is limited to what it can do in the hours that it has the student. And so the discipline within there is certainly been, newsworthy, recently, but beyond that, when there are instances where they know and have evidence that the kid skipped school, they weren't in class or whatever, they're limited in what they can do. And so it's going to continue to be a problem. Not to say that every school doesn't have it, but some of these
Right.
students who potentially are bused there, so they don't have transportation or whatever, they're just going and they're cutting into the woods and they're, creating problems for local businesses. And I bring that up to say there's going to be a lot of little things brought together to help deal with this.
Hmm.
But what we don't currently have is Gwinnett County PD does not currently have enough staff
Right.
to run a presence patrol for certain hours of the day where it's more problematic. And so if we had an internal city marshal, and it's important to us because it's important to these businesses, I can tell a city marshal, I want you to go out to the school and I want you to do a presence patrol, say during the hours where there's gaps in these kids' schedules, they have a free period and that's where they tend to cut class. And I want you to be driving around the back of those businesses. I want you to be a deterrent to
Hmm.
those students. And I want you
Like,
to be a resource for those. This will allow us to do those kind of things. This will allow us to detain somebody until a Gwinnett police officer gets there to arrest them if they were, a witness to the commission of a crime. It allows local code to be enforced at a level that a non-post certified code enforcement officer cannot do. And it allows code to continue to make sure that the city is looking and the way it does, that buildings are built safe, that properties maintained properly, all that stuff. They continue to do this, and now we have right now it looks like it'll probably be 3
mhm.
city marshals.
And
They
is that to cover a 24-hour period, by the way?
No, we're not needing to run 24-hour at all. That's
Okay.
again what Gwinnett PD is tasked with. 911 still operates the same, but another example would be the enforcement of the city's alcohol licensing process.
Okay.
those who serve alcohol have to get an alcohol license. And oftentimes alcohol can be the problem of why certain businesses are not operating properly.
Okay.
Enforcing of that, maybe even pulling license of establishments that are not being good actors. That
Hmm.
is a function that, unfortunately, without city marshals, we have to coordinate with Gwinnett PD, because they're the ones that have to have the authority to enforce certain
Right.
parts of that. So we depend on them. Massage parlors and licensing of those and trafficking is something
Right.
that we currently have to use Gwinnett PD. Even when law enforcement gets it to a certain point, we have to stop there, because we don't have post-certified officers that would have that. Or this will allow us to address those. So it's filling that gap that right now exists, and it doesn't. We don't have to stand up a police department. We have a good police department. They're strained by some policy and staffing, but we can, in addition to the technology we're using, we can have our own, individuals who have the same authorities. They're going to
Uh-huh.
exercise them in a very narrow area,
Right. They're
but
not.
they have the same authorities as Gwinnett PD, and it'll allow us to fill that gap. And that is what I presented to council, and that is what council said. We like it. Go back and give us the exact details, the table of organization and equipment of how it'll look. And that's what I'm doing. But the concept of standing this up, council said, one of our most sacred, you know, services as a city that we provide is to do everything we can to make sure this community is safe place to live, do commerce, recreate. And they felt like this will better provide that, that service.
Right. So just on a couple of little detailed things, just clarification for some people. Post certified means they've gone through the police academy. The same police academy every other police officer has to go
Correct.
through. Same type of training,
Yep.
how to interact with individuals and all that stuff. So
Use
there's
of
an
force, use of force,
correct.
the
Okay.
steps of escalation are all the same stuff. Now, mind you, again,
Okay.
we're by policy, we're going to end up restricting them to a very narrow left
Hmm.
and right limit, and that's the gap that we currently have. So they're not going to be going out. The only time I see them working off hours would be if we're having problems with certain things and they need
Right.
to be out then. But code enforcement does that, by just so that you
Hmm.
know already, is they sometimes code infractions are done after business hours. And so we have a
Sure.
cycle of, there's a code enforcement officer that works a weekend day every month.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
rotate through, but generally speaking, they're still the normal 8 to 5 type of code enforcement. This will
So
be the same. This will be the same.
same on this.
Yeah,
So three officers probably working at the same time through the week.
mostly.
In
Yep. Yep.
individual cars for each one of them.
Yep.
Working closely with, or when they need to, with Gwinnett Police.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
they, right? And if they end up arresting someone, they're not really arresting someone. They're going to detain them most likely in the back of their
Oh,
sheriff car.
Rico, a very important point is
Yes.
we're not wanting to get into starting to arrest under
Hmm.
our authority, even though the city has that authority and these officers would have been properly certified to do it. Gwinnett PD is going to still be our police. So
Right.
these will have the authority, but they at most would detain temporarily until a Gwinnett PD officer showed up to actually arrest.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
we're not wanting to get into, where you start having unnecessary use of force and all that stuff. No.
Okay. And as far as Fusus goes, or the eye in the sky, cloud
The
crime
real
center in
time
the cloud,
crime
if you
center,
will.
right? And
Yeah.
mind
I
you,
mean,
just so that you know, also that program, the official Connect
right.
Peachtree Corners program,
Uh-huh.
first week of January is going to be the big push where we're going to start encouraging, because it'll be set up and ready to receive, encouraging everybody that has video camera to, at a minimum, register their camera to let Gwinnett PD know you have one, so that if there is a crime in the area of that camera, Gwinnett will know exactly who has cameras in the area, how to contact them to request the video feed of a particular time period.
Right.
That will be, the Connect PTC through Fusus that program will be, it'll be, opened up first week of January. So yes, that is a critical part of the city marshals, because now they also would end up being able to monitor video feeds, including the city's, we got 82 cameras out at the town center now.
Right.
They will be able to use that. It's going to be a resource for them to use. And we can charge people and run them through municipal court. These are all assets that we want to better utilize or more utilized than what Gwinnett PD has the resources to do.
And I know that some people may ask this, so this will be an important question. How will this be funded, this additional police force, if you will, sheriff force? It's within the same budget, right? I mean, someone's going to say, does that mean that the millage rate will start existing or something? So tell us.
Thank you for teeing that very, very important question up for me.
Yes.
It's very important to know that this is all being done within the current and anticipated revenue streams that the city gets on an annual basis, meaning we can afford it within our own budget, which is a very important point. I mean, we're very proud that we're the second largest municipality in Georgia with no city property tax. And council does not want to be the first council to levy that. So that was an important part of my proposal to them. Their first question was, all right, great. Sounds good. We know that we see the gap. We see why you're recommending this to fill the gap. Can we afford it? And, I needed to know that before. And the, great answer was yes, we can. We were generating enough fund balance year after year that the run rate for 3 positions we can afford. We'll have a one-time, large capital, purchase. We're going to have to purchase 3 police cars, uniforms, some equipment. But once you purchase it, you're just, you're building in every, however long, we're going to have the life cycle of a police car, especially one that's not doing high-speed chases or whatever. It's a pretty long one. But yeah, we'll have that, and then it'll just be the annual run rate, but it is not going to at all result in none of our services are going to result in us having to levy a city millage rate.
Cool. All right. So if anyone has questions on this, they should put comments in the comments, depending where you're watching this or listening to it, or reach out to us, and we'll be doing a further in-depth article on this for later consumption.
And Rico, it's important to note that while council, considering public safety to be a sacred responsibility that council has, so they will not leave any stone unturned, which is why they're supportive of this. But the exact details, the exact table of organization and equipment is being done right now. So there are a few details that I may not know yet. This is anticipated to be part of the FY 2024 budget, which starts July 1 of 2023. So July 1 of this coming July 1 would be the first time that it would end up becoming, a live program, because I'm building it into next year's budget, which is, starts July 1 of next year. So this isn't something that's going to happen in a couple weeks or even a couple months. We're looking at 6 months from now.
Okay. All right. Planning. Everything needs a plan, and it takes time to do these things.
I mean, think about simple things like we got to get in and, lay out all of the policy stuff so that our insurance provider, the general liability insurance provider for the city, can include this type of activity in our insurance plan. I mean, you don't think about that until you get into it. And, what type of, are we going to have, require body cams? So when they're interacting with somebody, that camera is on, and how do we write the policy so that when they even though they have the same authority as a police officer, we're saying, no, this is this is your lane you're going to operate in. We got to write that policy. And so
Sure.
there's a lot of work involved, but what
Mhm.
I just told you is essentially the program. And again,
Yeah.
we're not the first to do this. Sugar Hill would be a great example of, you know, a, uh, you know, a decent sized city, not quite our size, but I think their last census was 30,000
Yeah, I think so.
people. But Gwinnett PD is their police department, provider, like through an intergovernmental agreement like we have. But they also have city marshals to fill this gap.
Yeah.
And so our program would be very similar to those, but it allows the city to be able to control assets to fill gaps that right now we can't really fill either very easily or in
Mhm.
some cases can't fill really at all.
All right. So more information to come on this. Like you said, there's logistical issues
Yep.
that you have to deal with, and even interviewing officer candidates for
Yeah,
the
you go live,
position and
you got
all
it.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a whole bunch of stuff. So it all takes time. Let's move on a little bit towards something a little different about new policy that's going to be put in place or being looked at to put in place about honorary roads versus renaming a road. So tell us a little bit about where that might be going and how that's come about.
So we had some requests of late of having certain people that have a prominent uh, you know place in this city's existence or the population of the area.
Hmm.
An example of that would be Paul Duke. Very prominent name in the creation of or the population of the area, creation of Tech Park and the city. We've had some other, instances where there's an individual that played a prominent role and their family or friends or others are like, we should rename a street.
Hmm.
And while that is done and it's all fine, renaming streets are not always a popular thing to do and certainly can be complicated and can cost people money. You rename a street of a business is on, and they could have stationery with their address, and
Right.
business cards, and you rename a street that a person is getting their prescriptions mailed to them, and they're worried that it won't get mailed to them in the right
Mm.
place when it changes. So to be careful, and as a result of me laying out to council when they said, "Hey, city manager, what about these requests? Should we?" I was like, you can, you're right. But I laid it out. They were like, yeah, that is kind of what other options are there. And there's one, and there's an honorary street name. And that is, you could have Main Street be the street name, but
Right.
then even on the street sign underneath it, it could be the honorary, Rico Figliolini Way, or whatever. And
Right.
so they like that idea because it doesn't change any of the addresses or anything, but it does
Hmm.
recognize somebody. So we created, my community development director, Diana Wheeler, created a great policy on who would qualify. Like, I believe in the policy, you can't be alive, to have
Okay.
an honorary
Sure.
street. They don't want it to somebody who's alive, and you get into that whole thing. You can't be
Right.
alive. You got to have certain things. So there's certain criteria for it, and that's what the policy is going to be. So when somebody comes to the city and says this, we can say no. We don't entertain, formal street renaming, but we do have an honorary street name program or policy. Here's what
Yeah.
it is, and if the individual that you're considering it, being renamed qualifies, then
Uh-huh.
well, council can consider it and they vote on it, yes or no. And it
Simple
has
majority.
a different colored sign that would go, I guess, above the main street name.
Right. It sounds like that's where it would be. I've seen them above. I've seen them done before like that, where they're above the main road name, like a little
Correct.
smaller, so
Yep.
it's not less confusing, I guess. All right. So, and that's probably, and that's a policy that might take that will be put in place, and I'm sure in the next city
Well, if
council
we
meeting or
vote
two?
on this Tuesday, just remind
This
you that
Tuesday? Okay.
our December Tuesday council meeting is moved earlier because of Christmas.
Right.
So this coming Tuesday, that's when they're entertaining it. And based on their feedback at the work session when the policy is presented to them, I anticipate it'll unanimously be approved.
Okay.
And so then we will. In fact, on the same agenda, we have the very first official request
Mhm.
for a street to be named, and it was to commemorate Perry P. Nesbitt. The Nesbitt family were one of the
Right.
earliest settlers of
Yep.
Peachtree Corners, and so that'll actually be on the agenda after council considers the street renaming policy. So I guess theory they could deny the street naming policy, and then the Perry P.
Good.
Nesbitt request that would obviously can't happen. But I don't
Right.
anticipate that happening because council's seen all the details, so that could happen as
Sure.
early
Sure.
as Tuesday.
All right. Cool. Um, Two other things that are going on, or organizations. One's the Redevelopment Authority, and the other one's the Downtown Development Authority. So let's take the DDA first, because you all are also filling some slots on those authorities currently. But part of the DDA right now exists, the mapping exists as an overlay, and the city council wants to be able to expand that. It sounds like to further go south on Peachtree Parkway towards Target and Dick's Sporting Goods. Why expand it, and what does that mean as far as what that how the how that would affect the underlying area?
So cities and counties
Hmm.
in probably all 50 states, but they utilize authorities, pseudo governmental entities with boards of director appointed by the local governing authority, city council, county commission, to um, oftentimes their goal is to facilitate economic development under certain call them policy focus. So a downtown development authority would be focused on facilitating economic development activity in an area defined as the downtown. And then a redevelopment authority would be doing the same thing, but they would have a redevelopment area of operation, and they're really looking at areas that were developed once, but maybe it's ran its life cycle, and their job is to facilitate activity in areas that have had initial activity. It's not undeveloped wooded lots. These are, could be parcels or areas of a city that are, seeing, a decline in activity in that area, or there's a new, better development they can consider. These authorities are created because they have certain flexibilities that the government itself does not have. And so they're tools that cities and counties use because they're more flexible. They
Hmm.
can do things with developers that the city cannot do directly. A good example of that would be, Rico, you could come in you could be a developer with one really innovative, awesome idea. You want to partner with the city to do something. The city is interested in doing it. The city's got to put money, or may say it's going to construct some aspect of it. Say we're going to build a parking deck for your development, as part of a public-private partnership. If the city does it, by law, we have to bid it out.
Hmm.
Or if we were doing a public-private partnership bid, we have to bid it out, and we have to give it to the lowest qualified bidder. So if you aren't the lowest qualified bidder, we lose the right to work with you, even if we thought your idea was the best.
Gotcha.
Authorities like an RDA or DDA can sole source. They don't have to do that. So it
They
gives
can
them
move.
flexibility.
They can move faster. Also, there's
They
less
can
red
move
tape on that front.
faster. Absolutely. And sometimes the board members of these things that they have one focus, whereas council is asked to do stuff all over the map. And they don't sometimes have the time, energy and focus to do some of this.
Right.
And so they essentially delegate certain objectives to these authorities, and then these authorities run with it based on the kind of objective constraints council give them. And so these two boards, they both exist.
Mm-hmm.
The probably and of course at the end of the year we're having to reappoint board members to other stuff too, like the planning commission, the zoning
Right.
board of appeals. But these two, why they're probably unique, is the DDA had three slots open that council needed to fill. There were two people moved away, one passed away. And the DDA, which had played an integral role in the city initially, the town center was done through our DDA.
Mm-hmm.
The DDA was the one who brokered all of the public-private partnership stuff. But when it was done, we kind of shifted focus to the redevelopment authority and the south side of the city, which is the zone that was, kind of the area of the city that the RDA was told go forth and come up with a plan to do certain, to enhance economic development there. And the DDA, to finish up with them, the initial downtown area was drawn relatively small, kind of around the town center forum area, and that's about it. We needed to expand probably down to the, Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, Publix area. Probably the most important part of that is by expanding it down there, it will encapsulate Tech Park. And Tech Park needs to be in the DDA's area of concentration because they are going to be tasked with really rolling up their sleeves and seeing what we can do to continue to help Tech Park get reimagined. How can we utilize Curiosity Lab to fill vacant office space or to redevelop certain lots? They're going to be a force multiplier, and they're going to be tasked with going and meeting with property owners and asking questions like, is the city doing everything it can to help you grow and be healthy? Meeting with developers to come up with creative ways to maybe, develop their lots or fill vacant office space. And so that's going to be their mandate. And we needed the board to be filled. And so they're going to be filled, and that's their mandate. And then the RDA's mandate, which is going into year 2, they finished up a year in which they took their area of concentration. They did a big year-long assessment of opportunities within it, and they presented those opportunities to council last month. And there were a couple of really good ideas, and the lowest hanging fruit was one of their ideas was to taking inspiration from how the Beltline has been used to revitalize areas of Atlanta, or Metro Atlanta, is to do the same with our multi-use trail, which is our version of it. And they identified some areas along Peachtree Corner Circle, kind of in between Holcomb Bridge Road and PIB, for there to be some trailheads created for the trail system, but also for vehicles to be able to, park at these trailheads and to be them to become a community recreational amenity connected to our trail. And that will help spurn some of the redevelopment in the area, maybe some, enhancements or upgrades to some of the apartment complexes in the area. Maybe they're getting better tenant. Those are, starting to, it becomes more enticing for people to live in the area because there are recreational amenities right there. Just like the Beltline did in Atlanta, we want to do it right here. And so that's the first. They have a number of ideas, but that one council has appropriated about $2 million for them to go ahead and acquire and, construct some trailheads, do the final design,
Although,
and construct these trailheads, and start moving the trail off of these trailheads to ultimately connect to what will be, I think, what all said and done, what we've identified, if it all goes well, it'll be about a 20-ish mile trail system throughout all of the city.
wow, that's very big. Is the 2 million from SPLOST or general funds, or how is that?
It's a mix of a number of them. There's certainly some SPLOS. There's certainly some stormwater money, because you've got some of the improvements are getting needing. It's going to be done along Crooked Creek, that area.
Right,
So some of
right.
the construction is, stormwater. So it's a mix of
Okay.
revenue streams, so that, they have real money to do a
Mm-hmm.
real project.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, it's exciting. They took a year and they really came back to council with some really good ideas. Some are big and would be a very large, potentially
Right.
larger amount than the city's prepared to do right this second, which
Okay.
we didn't want them to, sky was the limit. Some of them are intermediate, that they're within reach, but there's a few
Uh-huh.
more things that we need to do. And this one was pretty simple. I mean, it's a go out and acquire property. These are properties that are generally not developable because they're in the floodplain,
Mm-hmm.
stream buffer areas, and acquire it, design these, trailheads,
Right.
construct the trailheads, and let's create this community amenity, and let's start capitalizing on it and use it to lift the entire area up and make it better.
Cool. Cool. Sounds great. The RDAs, those other suggestions, other plans, were they presented to City Council
Yes,
at
sir.
some point? So they're available somewhere if other
They
people
are.
want to see what other ideas the RDA has in mind for the coming few years. Okay, cool.
They're on our website.
Excellent. Great. So we've covered quite a bit. And the biggest thing to me is the City Marshal System. And as you've explained that before, I mean, this wouldn't start until likely July 1st, which is the budget year for the city. And out of the existing funds, no extra funds are necessary. So it's working out of the surplus of money that the city has already on an ongoing basis. And city leadership has done a great job in keeping that surplus, to me, it seems, and be able to have a good, strong budget to be able to do some of these things without having to raise any taxes or anything. So all good stuff. Good leadership, Brian. It's a pleasure to always talk to you about these things and finding out more about what the city's doing.
Thanks for the opportunity to, keep our stakeholders, as educated as we possibly can.
Yeah,
And, hey, have a great holiday. Hope everybody has a great, safe, enjoyable holiday, and we'll be ready to hit the ground running beginning of next year.
yeah. Let's not forget the end of the year is coming. So, and by the way, anyone that's checking their mailbox, hopefully you'll see a new copy of Peachtree Corners magazine. Faces of Peachtree Corners. It's about 20 people that help make this city a better place to live in. So check it out. Um, Good talking to you, Brian. Everyone, enjoy the holidays. Be safe out there, because God knows, even if you're looking around, sometimes things can happen. So stay safe. Hug your family. Make sure you're around, because you never know what might happen. So.